Once you learn mathematics at a decently high level, you can learn anything. But not only can you learn anything, you can do so extremely quickly. And you may have heard that before, right? You may have gotten the wrong assumption that the reason for this is because of difficulty. Like you now understand a certain mathematical concept, and that concept is so complicated that now anything else by comparison seems super simple, and that's not actually correct. It's partially true, but that's not the main reason that learning mathematics makes learning other things so easy. And actually, many people who study mathematics don't really know how to do anything outside of mathematics, especially when they do so in academia. So that can't be the explanation, because if mathematics, just by the nature of it being super complicated, meant that you could study anything after it, then we would see far more of that, with people leaving academia and being able to learn things extremely quickly. But we don't really see that. Okay, and the reality is that there's something unique to mathematics that no other subject can really teach you, and that is abstraction. Like, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm not going to like build it up or something. It's abstraction. That is the main thing that mathematics is very good at teaching you. It's not necessarily just from mathematics, like something like philosophy or physics. Like, they all have parts of this, but that's the main skill that a mathematician uses. It's abstraction, and no pun intended. But fine, that sounds kind of abstract. So what do I mean, right? So every system you try and learn or interact with is extremely complicated and has loads of things affecting it. The mathematician's job is essentially to generalize a system and simplify it. That is what abstraction means. So a basketball player throws a ball into a hoop. Like, that is pretty simple. It's relatively simple. But there are thousands and thousands of variables affecting that throw every time. Okay, so whether they're like, you could model it as individual air particles that affect the way that the ball spins in the air or something like this. The point is, it's extremely complex, even if it doesn't seem so. And the mathematician's job is to simplify and generalize a system to a level that it can be interacted with and explained repeatedly, right? So with the ball example, with the basketball example, the basketball player doesn't know that any of this is happening. They've built that intuitively. They've built the same understanding intuitively. And actually, I talk about how intuition is actually a very advanced form of learning and cognition in my other videos, if you want to check that out. But for the purpose of this, right? So what is the mathematician doing? Well, you can model things, okay? You can take away the unnecessary detail. For example, you model the force, you model the drag, you model the trajectory of the ball. And you may be listening to this thinking this is starting to sound a lot like physics. And that's actually the point, right? Because once something becomes large enough and developed enough as its own thing, it turns into a different subject entirely, right? So you start with simple the mathematician's job of modeling an abstract system, right? You start with modeling these invisible variables that affect the thing you're talking about. So with the basketball, it could be the force of gravity on the ball and the trajectory at which you throw it and the drag that it experiences, etc. And the powerful nature of doing this essentially is such that once you have a good enough model and you've generalized it enough, you can start to use these principles in other areas. That's the whole point, right? So to explain this concept of the ball being thrown into the hoop, you can talk about something like gravity, a force pulling down on the ball. And then you start to look in other areas and you think, well, now that we've generalized it, now that we've made it more abstract, we can actually see this same kind of principle in play in another area. We can see it when a ball is rolling down a hill, or we can see it just by you standing on the floor. And now you start to connect the dots, and this becomes so developed that it becomes its own thing. It becomes physics in this example, right? And you see how the point is that the new topic, the physics in this case, is just an emergent property of structuring your thinking about a system, and that structure becoming big enough that it turns into its own subject. So the mistake would be assuming that any of these things are unrelated, right? So sure, we have the separation of subjects, and you can talk about why that's the case, like historically, or for the purpose of, so we know what we're talking about, so we're all on the same page. Like when we're in the framework of psychology, we're talking about these specific things and these specific ideas. When we're in the framework of history, we're talking about these specific ideas and these specific things. It's useful in that sense, but like the separation between them at some level is arbitrary, is subjective. So where does chemistry stop and biology begin? Where does neuroscience stop and psychology begin? Where does history stop and journalism begin? Right? The point is that there are no clearly defined rules and lines. They're kind of at the edges of these subjects. They're gray. It's very much gray. It's not black and white. And the thing is, when you're too deep within a framework, you forget that the distinctions are arbitrary at some level. That's why I mentioned this, because once you go into something deep enough, once you study law, for example, and you've studied law for 10 years, you start to see things in the perspective and the framework of law. I'm a law student, I'm a lawyer or something like this, and I see everything through that perspective. So how does that relate back to my point at the start of the video? Because now that we understand this, we can see mathematics for what it really is very good at, in particular. So I already touched on this, but mathematics teaches high-level abstraction and meta-reasoning. Okay, fine. That's a basic statement, though. Nobody disagrees with that. But then, for any of you who've done even a bit of maths at school, for example, okay, you associate that with a specific domain in mathematics. So even when I just say mathematics, you're like thinking of trigonometry, or you're thinking of calculus, or you're thinking of real analysis. And the point is that being good at learning things happens accidentally because you do the same thing with mathematics as happens with other subjects, right? So let me explain what I mean by that. So when you explicitly know what mathematics is actually training you to do, when you practice and you practice applying that outside of mathematics, you're basically able to make abstract any system and learn and understand things extremely quickly and efficiently. This is the way I see it, right? So instead of mathematics as a topic, as a domain of study in and of itself, just like physics is talking about the physical laws of the universe, or psychology is talking about the brain, etc. Mathematics is unique in the way that it is more so a way of seeing the world, the way of thinking, rather than a specific topic about which you are thinking. That's the slight distinction, right? So psychology, for example, is just an application of mathematical thinking as it relates to the brain, or neuroscience, for example. Football tactics, even. Something really, we can just extend this as much as we really want to. Football tactics are an application of mathematical thinking to football. Okay, music is an application of mathematical thinking relating to psychology and what sounds good, etc., and how we can, describe different frequencies of noise, etc. You get the point, right? And the thing is, you can use this practically. Okay, like forget all the philosophy, forget all the theory. For example, I use this to understand nutrition better, to understand psychology of learning better. In fact, I basically learned all of A-level maths and physics in a month, to the point where I did so well in my exams that I got a full scholarship to study maths and physics at university. Okay, and when these ideas come into contact with reality, that is when they're most powerful. It's kind of like the movie Limitless. If any of you have ever seen Limitless, in the movie, basically some guy takes a pill and he unlocks access of his brain to full 100%. Right? Obviously that's a movie, that's fake, but what does he do? He basically becomes a millionaire and he like runs the country. Okay, he runs for president or something like that. And the point is that you don't really need a magic pill to do that. Like, there are real frameworks and practices that when you learn explicitly, you start to have a much better understanding of your brain, of how learning works, and how to apply those ideas practically. The thing is that you've just never been taught it, or you've never been explained it in the way that I'm explaining it right now, okay? Because everything that you do in school, for example, so school is a place in which you learn, but school does not focus on the meta skills of the things you are learning. School can only focus on the domains of the specific topics in which you're learning, right? So like I said earlier with mathematics, instead of seeing mathematics as a domain of thinking, like instead of hearing the word mathematics and thinking trigonometry, calculus, real analysis, etc., you start to hear the word mathematics and think abstract thinking, or objective and constraint modeling, or something like this. The point is that there's a distinction between the what of what you're looking at and the how of how someone who developed that field to begin with, someone who before psychology was even a real topic, how did they turn that into an entire field of study? And you can basically apply those same principles to a smaller scale to do things practically for yourself. If that's something that interests you, then you'll be happy to know that I have a full course and free community where I teach and talk about exactly how I did this for myself and how you can do the same. The first link below will take you to that. If you've made it to this point in the video as a new viewer, make sure to subscribe. You clearly enjoyed this enough to stay to this point, and you'll get plenty more of this in the future, as well as seeing plenty more of this if you go through my channel and watch some of my older videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.